All right, welcome back, everyone. In this PowerPoint, we're going to go over Flannery O'Connor and Shirley Jackson. And these two stories will finish up the short story module, and then you'll be prepared for the short story exam. All right, so the first one is Flannery O'Connor. She was born March 25th, 1925, and passed away on August 3rd, 1964. Her works are usually set in rural American South. That is where she grew up. So that again, you write what you know. She often also treats on the theme of alienation. We had talked a little bit about this with Neil Gaiman and Gabriel Garcia Marquez of foreignness and the other. Part of that is alienation of the other. She also is often concerned with the relationship between God and an individual. She grew up Roman Catholic in a well-to-do family, and so it's interesting too that she, despite being Roman Catholic, and a very devout Roman Catholic, she's often concerned with the relationship between God and the individual, but also because she questions a lot for someone of such good faith. She went to college at Georgia State College for Women, which is now just Georgia State College. And then she went to the University of Iowa Writers Workshop to study creative writing. Her father had lupus, which she inherited, and unfortunately, it eventually caused her death because it is a um, horrible disease where the immune system attacks the organs. Um, But while she was alive, her work was published in magazines and she began publishing books. However, she only won the National Book Award in 1972 posthumously, and several of her works were published posthumously as well. Her work is characterized by common speech, so we're not doing, high flowery language. We're using the common speech of what the characters really would say and do, a caustic religious imagination, and a certain flair for the absurd. This is a quote from Encyclopedia Britannica about her that she is a writer whose works defy conventional categorization. Her corpus is notable for the seemingly incongruity of a devout Catholic whose darkly comic works commonly feature startling acts of violence and unsympathetic, often depraved characters. So again, this is that question that everyone says it's a little bit weird for someone who is so devout Catholic to deal with characters who are so violent and depraved and ungodly. She explained the prevalence of brutality in her stories by noting that violence is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace. It is this divine stripping of human comforts and hubris, or extreme pride, along with the attendant degradation of the corporeal, that stands as the most salient feature of O'Connor's work. So in 1953, she published A Good Man is Hard to Find, which is a short story collection of the same name. So the collection is called A Good Man is Hard to Find, and this is kind of the titular story in that collection. So again, we want to think about our feelings about the tale. The fact that we get it, it's technically in third person, but it's third person limited. We're very much focused on the grandmother and what she experiences. And after she dies, I mean, to think that we go through her death from her point of view, that's already, we're going along the story, and then, oh my God, she's killed. That is already mentally something that I find interesting in a story. Again, I've said it with the other stories with first person of it's an interesting study, even because of the way it makes you feel. To me, this makes me feel very creeped out. Um, and then it because the grandmother's dead as well as everyone else that we were following, it switches to the antagonist point of view, still through third person limited, but focusing on the antagonist. And that's just again interesting to me because we get to see from his point of view, but also it's not common in third person limited to switch between different characters unless you have something like where one chapter is from one character and another chapter is from another character. We usually don't get the switch to be so immediate and abrupt. Also, it is a relatable story in some ways for many people because the idea of going on a family vacation and driving in the car to get to a place, that is relatable to most people of having experienced it, and the both good and bad that comes with such a experience can be relatable. But obviously this one has an absurd ending. So the characters, we get Bailey, who is the father, grandma's son. He, as a son, is really not the best person. Um, However, we could argue she's not the best mother either. So that makes it that maybe, you get the treatment you deserve. But also because we're seeing it from third person limited a lot from grandma's point of view, how we see Bailey act is through her perception. Now, it's not first person, so it's not entirely through her perception, but it could be very limiting to us to know, is this really the way he's acting towards his mother, or is it potentially because of something she did that it's not something she's not telling us because it's third person, but is there more to it? Is it because of the way she acts towards him? We don't know. June Star and John Wesley are the two children of Bailey and his wife. They also have another baby, but it's interesting because Bailey's wife and his third child are never named. Um, to me, it's significant because clearly, again, even though it's third person limited, we're still from the point of view of the grandmother. We don't get to see inside her thoughts. We don't get to know what does she feel towards her son's wife, but we can get a hint if she's never named that clearly she's not even deigning to name the woman. That means the grandmother really doesn't care for her daughter-in-law. Or maybe the baby, or maybe the baby's just too young that it's just easy to say the baby. Red Sammy and his wife are kind of just characters to show, they're the opposite of Bailey. They agree with everything the grandmother says, but they also help us. We don't want to just tell people, well, she's an irreverent, manipulative woman who has her own ideas of the way life should be and the way people should act. So Red Sammy and his wife show this to us through the dialogue without us having to be told it outright. Hiram and Bobby Lee are the misfit henchmen. So again, they're really just to kind of show that the misfit doesn't often get his own hands dirty and kind of highlight more about the misfit. And then our main characters. Our protagonist is the grandmother. And just like I said before, it's not necessarily good guy, bad guy. It's just the person we're following throughout the story. So the grandmother, as I said earlier, she is manipulative. She is not a good woman. She's very much representative of the end of the Civil War and into the Jim Crow era of how people were, and that she wasn't giving up on that Southern white childhood that she grew up with. She's very much still the Southern belle, has her ideas of the way life should be and the way people should act and what should happen to people. She's also very irreverent. She only brings up God and thinking about how, and it's kind of hypocritical and blasphemous, but how people should act by God when it's her life in danger, not when she's thinking about how she's treating her grandchildren or her children, or I should say, her son and daughter-in-law. And it wasn't to protect them, it was to protect herself. The misfit is very much, he's our antagonist for certain, obviously, because he stopped the grandmother from her goal by, ending her life. But he is an interesting character because it's hard to know what is real or not about him. We've gotten tidbits about him that he was an escaped murderer. He says that other people say he killed his father. We don't know for sure that he really did anything that he says he did. We also don't get a lot of description about him. So it's certainly interesting. Obviously, we get the fact that he kills the grandmother. So we know he's not a good person. He's definitely a criminal by that point. And whether he was or not before, what he did or not, we don't know. We're only left to speculate. But he clearly is disgusted by people like the grandmother who only care about themselves and are only reverent when it their their bottom line that is threatened. Some themes in the story: good versus evil, religion, manipulation, definitely from the grandmother. I mean, she manipulates everyone throughout the story, manipulating people of, oh, we should go this way because that's the way I want to go, not what's good for everyone. She brings the cat, even though it, it ultimately leads to her own downfall, but she's not willing to listen to anyone because it's about what she wants. It's not about what's good for everyone else. There is a theme of family and also very much a theme of society and class. Again, we talked about the point of view earlier, the fact that it's third person and it's limited. So we're limited to just one character going along, but it's an interesting because we don't see that person's thoughts. We don't know what they're thinking, but we are limited to that one person. And as I stated earlier, it's not usual that we have an abrupt ending to our point of view and an abrupt switch to whose point of view we're following. This is part of the Southern Gothic genre. We talked about this with Faulkner in A Rose for Emily. The fact of themes of race and decay, themes of the macabre, things like that all make this part of the Southern Gothic genre. The title of the story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, is based on a song from 1918 of the same name. Also, there is some allusions. So this one, the founder of the Methodist Church, his name is John Wesley, and that is the name of the young son. Now, whether the family themselves are Methodist, or it was just an interesting allusion to what she believes in, the grandmother, um, not our author. Our author O'Connor is a devout Catholic. It's just an interesting little illusion. We also get a lot of symbolism. So Tombsboro, obviously with an extra O, there is a real Tombsboro, but the fact that it kind of references a tomb itself, this is foreshadowing that this is not going to end well for our characters. The uh automobile that the misfit drives is a big black battered hearse like automobile. What better for a person to drive than someone who deals in death? But also, we don't often look at hearses. So if he's driving a hearse and the police don't know this, that's a good way to get away with why you've got dead bodies in the back. The cloudless, sunless sky. It's cloudless, which would make it seem like it's a beautiful day, but it's also not very sunny. So that leads to, is it really a beautiful day or a beautiful day to die? Um, we also get the fact of the dark forest. Many stories have, when they have a dark forest, it's referencing the German Black Forest, and this is where in tales where bad things happen. In our tale, this is where the majority of the family is murdered, and the reason why we think of the German Black Forest this way and all that is because during the time of the conquest of Gaul by Julius Caesar, which was modern day Germany and France. the Germanic tribes were trying to flee from Julius Caesar because Caesar did have greater armies than they did. Not necessarily better fighters or better weapons or better tactics, but just greater in numbers than the Germanic tribes had. However, the tactic of the Roman army was to be so many people across. So the Germanic tribes hid in the Black Forest, and that meant that the Roman soldiers had to go one by one, single file through the forest, so they were a lot easier to pick off one by one by the Germans than it was by everyone else who was there. The So that is the story of why the German Black Forest that then became legends by the Romans that there were creatures that lived in the Black Forest because it was easier to say that than that they got their butts beat by the Germans. But it was a brutal slaughter that happened during that battle. It was not one of Caesar's better days. So that is the story of Good Man It's Hard to Find. In our last video, we'll go over Shirley Jackson and her story, The Lottery.